All right, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Miami Dade College and the Summer Enrichment Series. My name is Professor Daniel Gordy. I am the grant coordinator for the Hospitality Institute here at Miami Dade College, which is our non-credit hospitality program, as well as an adjunct faculty for the academic program as well. I am also a National Restaurant Association ServSafe instructor and proctor. And I have been teaching this course, food safety and sanitation, for quite some time, at least 8 years, and actually have been ServSafe or food safety certified since 2003. So I know this subject in and out of my head, sleep through and everything. So we welcome you guys today to coming on this session. And today we're going to talk about protecting yourself at home with food safety. So just, there's a little cliche amongst how we have this expectation that we go into a restaurant that food is going to be handled and prepared safely. And that is true. But however, there are many habits at home that people do where they're not protecting themselves. So just wanted to share some few tips with you guys so that you can practice this at home so that no one gets sick at all, whether you're going to a restaurant or more so importantly at home. So let's go into our first slide. So what we want for you to understand today is how to understand of providing safe food. Different types of forms of contamination, how food actually gets contaminated through various ways, and we'll talk about that. There's 3 different ways. How to protect yourself when you're preparing food so that no one gets sick. The flow of food process. So many people believe or actually don't think about the whole process of how food enters into our system from when it's actually grown and harvested. There is a long process from where the food comes from, how it's taken care of, how it's harvested, how it's treated and prepared when you are in your operation or when you're at home until that last final bite. So there's a whole process, and at any point in that time, food can become unsafe to eat. So let's look at the challenges to food safety. So anybody on, what do you think are some of the challenges when it comes to food safety at your own home? Or what do you think the challenges to food safety is at a restaurant? Anybody want to take a guess? And if you're new to this platform with Zoom, there is a chat function at the bottom. You can type in there and indicate that, what you think some of those challenges are. So we got one. So we got space to store food, yes. We have another one, not being able to refrigerate the food promptly and properly. Yes, those are all challenges when it comes to food safety. However, there are more challenges beyond that as well. So we also have, one second, foodborne illness. So if you are unaware of this definition, foodborne illness is actually a disease transmitted to people through food, okay? So foodborne illness happens when food or pathogens or bacteria comes in contact with food, and then by way of us eating that food, then we end up getting sick, and more than likely a foodborne illness has developed. Okay, there's also a thing called foodborne illness outbreak, and that only happens when 2 or more people have the same symptoms after eating the same food. So if anyone's ever experienced food poisoning, where you've gone to someone's house or a friend's house, or you've gone to a restaurant and you and another person end up eating the same food and you've had some of the same symptoms, which are typically the same, which I'll cover, more than likely a foodborne illness outbreak has actually occurred. And the worst thing is that we don't want the outbreak to actually get very, very severe. Okay, and I'm sure all of you have heard of foodborne illness outbreaks throughout the country where there's been an outbreak in avocados, there's been an outbreak in spinach or leafy greens, chicken and whatnot. These things typically happen frequently, and it's all due to not practicing good food safety habits. So at home, it's very, very important that you do the same thing. So when you come home, especially if you're a family and you've got kids, make sure everyone's washing their hands, making sure all the dishes are clean, food is not sitting out and, without any kind of, refrigeration, all very important. Okay. When a foodborne illness outbreak actually has occurred, an investigation is conducted by your local, state, and regulatory authorities. So in this case here in Florida would be, or Miami-Dade County specifically, would be the Miami-Dade Health Department would investigate when there's a foodborne illness outbreak. And typically that, again, happens in restaurants, but these things can happen in the home too. Simply put, let's say, for example, you go to Publix, you buy groceries, you get home, you cook the food, and then next thing you know, your whole family is sick from eating the same thing. It's a chance and a possibility that the food actually that you purchased was already contaminated at the grocery store or prior to getting there. So this is important for you guys at home to make sure, if you're feeling sick, to report these kinds of things, because again, some people have weaker immune systems than others, and we don't want them to get sick or have the worst symptom of all is leading towards death. So very, very important to pay attention to those symptoms if you actually contract or consume some of this food and it made you sick. Okay, the outbreak is confirmed by laboratory analysis, and we'll talk briefly about some of the different foodborne illnesses that are out there. A lot of them are very, very common amongst and associated with different types of foods, but they're typically the same illnesses that occur constantly. Okay, so anybody want to take a guess? I have a couple pictures here. Okay, foodborne illness occurs through these various contaminants. So anybody want to take a guess? What are the 3 different ways that food can get contaminated? So if you look at this picture here, you see all these cells. What do you think this actually represents? Who wants to take a guess? You can type in the chat. You can turn on your mic if it's easier for you to see. Okay, we'll look and see. Yes, okay, so this top picture is bacteria, okay? Whoops, I went a little too fast, but it's okay. So this top picture is bacteria. So we have a biological contamination, we have a chemical contamination, and we have a physical contamination. So let me just move this toolbar up a little bit. I don't know if it's affecting you guys, if you can see. Take this, whoops. Video, okay, there we go. That's much better. Okay, so we have bacteria, we have viruses, we have parasites, and we have fungi. So these are the top biological contaminants. Okay, so these biological contaminants typically happen at the beginning of the flow of food process. So where the food comes from, where it's harvested, that's when these things typically start to develop. They also develop when the food is in your possession. So for example, if you leave out cheese outside the refrigerator for an extended period of time, what do you think is going to happen? And if you don't mind turning on your mic if you have an answer, because my toolbar is hidden, so you guys are not affected by what's on the screen.
I was going to say mold develops.
Yes, mold starts to develop. So things that, are that you have in your kitchen for an extended period of time, these things really start to develop and grow on the actual food. So definitely this is a big one. So it's very, very important to make sure hands are washed. You pay close attention when you're at the grocery store to the expiration dates and the food that you purchase, and also make sure you're managing and you're looking at what you're purchasing. If anything looks odd or strange before you actually get to the checkout line, make sure you examine those things before you actually purchase. Okay. We also have chemical contaminants, so cleaners, sanitizers, and polishes. Those are also foodborne illness contaminants. Typically, this happens in restaurants where someone is cleaning while cooking is taking place, and that you do not want to do at the same time. But at home, you have chemical contaminants. So for example, A lot of us use the Clorox wipes to wipe things down, wipe counters down. Some people that have granite countertops, there's polishes for that. Some people that have stainless steel polishers where they're cleaning. Okay, we want to make sure that we don't clean and cook at the same time, because we don't want to risk getting those chemicals mixed up with our food. Definitely when it comes to sprays. Okay, so I know some people, they keep the Glad plugins inside their kitchens to keep their kitchen smelling fresh. Okay, when those chemicals dispense into the air, they can, lead to getting mixed up with the food that you're preparing if you happen to be preparing at the same time. So just be very, very cognizant of that fact. Chemicals can be considered a contaminant. Okay, and we've all had this happen before. Physical hazards in our food. So metal shavings, staples, bandages, glass, dirt, natural objects such as fish and bones in a fillet, those are all considered to be physical hazards. And those are probably a little bit more damaging to our bodies when a contamination actually occurs. So for example, like staples, and I'm from New York City originally, so I'm used to, the Chinese food that you get, on the next to the bodega. And back then in the 90s, they used to staple the takeout boxes. Sometimes if the staple, finds its way through, if you ordered a small portion of fried rice, it would end up in there. So you just have to be very, very cautious of the physical hazards. Well, the most one that we all see is when we see hair in our food, we freak out, right? So when there's hair in your food, hair is biologically produced, but it is a physical hazard. So just be cognizant of that fact when you are inspecting your food before you cook it, or after it's been cooked and you're about to eat. Make sure that food has been prepared in a safe way so that you avoid all of these particular contaminants. You have a question?
Yeah, Daniel, we had a question about, and you may get into this a little bit, but what do you recommend is the best way to wash lettuce and greens and vegetables and fruits? Making sure that the contaminants stay out of or eliminated from the food.
So this one is a hard one when it comes to produce, because most of the foodborne illness outbreaks that have occurred, in this country in the last, 20 something years, I'm sure you've all seen the spinach outbreaks, avocado outbreaks. These outbreaks are occurring at the actual farms where it's actually taking place. So it's very hard to try to sort of contain that, especially when these outbreaks occur. They have the biological contaminants as you see on the screen. So it's kind of hard to stop that. So it's really at the responsibility of the vendor and our government to make sure we regulate that and prevent these outbreaks from happening. Now, when the food is in our possession, again, it's very hard to stop that. But things that we can do, particularly, we can always wash our fruits and vegetables as much as possible. What I personally like to do, if I'm, making vegetables or whatever, I like to soak it in cold water. And you actually can go to your grocery store and you can buy a chemical that is specifically meant and made for cleaning vegetables. So you can do that for sure to try to make sure your vegetables are clean. But again, we are solely relying on the responsibility of the governing bodies to make sure that when food comes from the farm and it's brought into the grocery store, that it's safe to purchase and also, most importantly, safe to eat. If that answers your question.
Thank you.
Okay. So very, very important. Another thing that I personally like to do, not just vegetables, I like to also clean my food, if that makes sense. So for example, like if I'm making chicken, I like to, clean my chicken, which some chefs will go ballistic when I say this. I like to make sure I rinse it out in lukewarm water, get the fat off. And I also add distilled white vinegar as well. So I clean it that way. When I'm cleaning seafood, I like to clean it with fresh lemon juice or lime juice. When I'm cooking red meat, which is very rare, I like to use apple cider vinegar. That's just my own personal habit that I like to do. I have another question.
Thank you, Daniel. And also, and thank you for that answer, guiding us for the cleaning of it. And this might sound crazy, but would utilizing like a soft soap, like work as well? Because I know sometimes you buy, say, tomatoes and fruits that people are really touching to just test them in the supermarket, for example. Is it is it dangerous to utilize soap or just that chemical that you mentioned? Do you think will be best?
I think the chemical would be more sufficient, especially when it comes to cleaning certain foods. Like, for example, it may be okay to use a soft soap, and this is just for in your home. It may be okay to use a soft soap if you're cleaning tomatoes that have not been cut yet. But definitely something like lettuce, you might want to use the regular chemical vegetable cleaner that's, it's made for. Certain other ones, other vegetables, leafy greens, you might want to use that. But it's okay to use a little bit or let it soak if you feel that's better for you. But the thing for sure is, and which is why we have these different chemicals to clean vegetables. They're made for that, so they don't become a chemical contaminant. Whereas, when you're dealing with soap, which is more of a thick liquid, it's kind of hard to get rid of after some time. So, but it is recommended to just use the chemicals that are made for cleaning vegetables.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, no problem. All right, so I think we've talked about enough. I think we got the picture that biological, chemical, and physical are all the main foodborne illness contaminants. So let's move on. Okay, so these are the reasons. This is how food becomes unsafe. So first thing is we buy food from unsafe sources, and this is more specifically for restaurants, but for at home too. We typically buy food from the wrong sources. Food that has not been approved by the USDA or regulated by the FDA. We typically do that a lot. I don't know if we have time, but I would show you a video, and if you want, I can send you the link. If you're familiar with Jackson Memorial Hospital and that surrounding area in Alapata in the city of Miami, you will know that there's plenty of food warehouses that are in that area, and some of the owners and workers there are reselling food that has expired. So when I say purchase food from unsafe sources, meaning that the source is not regulating or keeping good control of the food that they're selling, or someone just randomly got food from somewhere and is trying to resell it. So make sure you buy food from safe sources. You don't want to buy it from some guy that's selling food on the street and you don't know where the food has come from, how it got there, how it's been maintained. We see that a lot typically with seafood here in South Florida, where people are buying seafood from, people that are just randomly selling it near the Miami River of some sort. So make sure you buy food from a safe source. Always best to, go to a supermarket or go to a farm that's an approved vendor. And you can also check up on some of these places where you buy food. I'll find the link and we can share that after class to make sure you're buying it from a safe source. The second step is that we fail to cook food correctly. And this means is that we don't cook food to the temperature that it's supposed to be. So sometimes we may undercook something, or it's not cooked hot enough, or it wasn't, it sat out too long and it was then cooked. We fail to cook food correctly lots of times, because a lot of people at home, and I'll admit it myself, I don't check the temperature of the food when I cook it at home. I probably should to make sure it's cooked to the right temperature, but when you are serving a large group of individuals, you make sure you want to do that, particularly when families come together during the holidays, Thanksgiving dinner or Christmas dinner or Christmas Eve dinner. Make sure you check the food and make sure it's cooked to the right temperature. And that leads to step number 3, holding food at the incorrect temperature. So food that's being held at the wrong temperature is a big, big problem. And you see this a lot when you go to the grocery store, particularly stores that have buffets. So for example, you go to Whole Foods during lunch, the food may have been sitting on the hot bar for quite some time and may have lost its temperature. Or if you go to, for example, Golden Corral, you may experience these kinds of things, but always make sure food is at the right temperature, because surely like you guys, I like hot food hot. I like cold food cold. Okay. Using contaminated equipment is a big problem. Make sure all of the things that you use is clean before you start prepping and working and cleaning and cooking with food. So, and I actually do have a picture on one of the upcoming slides, if it's not this one, to make sure that you use the right equipment for the right type of food. And the biggest thing and the biggest problem when it comes to food safety is we have to practice good personal hygiene. So the biggest thing is hand washing. And I'm sure we've all heard that over the last couple of years, you know, obviously with COVID and whatnot. Good hand washing is a big step, and that's going to help us stay safe from any type of food contamination. So make sure you wash your hands for at least 15 to 20 seconds, the whole process. And I'll show you the step-by-step. Make sure you eliminate nail polish and those kinds of things when you're working with food. And you can practice this at home. This will keep the germs away. Okay. Anyone have any questions so far? Any questions? Okay. Are you guys pointing out your own red flags that you do at home, thinking some changes I could be making? All right. So let's move on. So here is how food becomes unsafe. We have time and temperature abuse. Okay, so if you look in this first picture on the northwest corner, you'll see it says time and temperature abuse. And if you can make out that temperature, it says 54 on there. And just want to ask you, what temperature you think this potato salad should be?
45?
Close, but no champagne. Vivian, you want to take a guess?
I mean, I'm seeing 54, but I don't know. Perhaps colder, because I'm thinking that has mayo most likely.
Yes.
So I wonder if it's 30 something, 37. I don't know.
Okay, you guys are close. You're in between. So it should be no warmer than 41 degrees. Okay, so any kind of cold food, TCS food, and when I say TCS food, I mean things such as it's ready to eat, so to speak. So for example, macaroni salad, potato salad, shrimp salad, any kind of sandwich, those things should be held at 41 degrees or lower, okay? The next picture you see says cross-contamination. What's wrong with this picture here? Anybody want to take a guess?
So you're mixing the raw meat, I think it's chicken, with vegetables. So really, that's a no-no that could have, I think, what is it, E. coli or how is it called?
Salmonella.
Salmonella. I'm sorry. That's what I meant. Salmonella.
Okay. Salmonella.
So it could really contaminate the vegetables because it's raw. Raw meat it's a no-no, I think.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that is absolutely correct. So cross-contamination. So we have raw chicken breasts being not only cut on with the same knife, but using the same cutting board. So that liquid from the chicken is spilling over into the lettuce. So that is a big no-no. That happens a lot too. So at home, and again, I'll show you another slide. If you are at home and you have if you use one cutting board to cut everything, make sure you're washing that cutting board frequently before you begin a new task. Okay. Another thing you can do at home is you can buy different colored cutting boards to store at home. Not only you want to buy that, but if you just have one cutting board, you're really giving a lot of wear and tear to that one cutting board. And even though you wash it every single time, that cutting board, particularly if it's a wood one, will become unsafe. It'll become a physical hazard because the cutting board will deteriorate over time. So you want to make sure you replace your cutting boards as much as possible if there's wear and tear on there. Okay. The other two pictures, you see poor personal hygiene. This gentleman is scratching his arm. He must have some kind of wound or mosquito bite. And then in the last picture, you see poor cleaning and sanitizing. This young lady, I'm assuming she is wiping down the table, but she's using the rags and she's keeping it in her apron when she should really keep the rags inside a little bucket of sanitizer water. So these are definitely ways that foods become unsafe. Okay, so the foods that are likely to become more unsafe are, we have dairy. So you see here we have cheese and we have milk. We have eggs. We have meat. We have seafood, which is seafood, shellfish, I meant to say. We have full fish. We have baked potatoes or cooked food or cooked rice. And we have tofu and soybeans. These foods are likely to become unsafe because they are the most vulnerable to foodborne illnesses. These are also called TCS foods. These are the foods that need temperature control for safety. Okay. We also have raw chicken. We have melons. We also have leafy greens, and we have tomatoes. We have flavored oils, and we have sprouts. So these are all called, again, TCS foods, temperature control foods that need control for safety. These are the foods that are the most likely to become unsafe. So I'm sure we've all had some kind of one of these foods in our kitchen, in our refrigerator, spoil after some times, maybe spoil even before 7 days after you've cooked it or brought it in your home. It's spoiled a lot quicker. So these are the foods that we have to pay close attention to make sure that when we cook it to the right temperature, and when we serve it to guests or serve people in our home, that it's cooked and it's well done so that nobody gets sick. Okay, how we can keep food safe is we can control time and temperature. We can prevent cross-contamination. We can practice good personal hygiene. Make sure we buy food from approved suppliers. So in this case, since it's for home, we make sure we're getting it from a good farmer's market, or we're getting it from our local grocery store where we know that there is approved USDA certifications for that establishment, and then good cleaning and sanitizing. I will say one of the biggest things that I've seen people at home do is that when they cook something, when it comes to controlling time and temperature, is that they will actually put the food after it's cooked directly in the refrigerator, which is not a good idea. This does not allow the chance for the food to properly cool to the right temperature that it needs to be. So this is a big thing that if we can focus on these measures, we definitely can keep food safe. Okay. Does anyone know how a contamination actually happens? Who wants to take a guess? They come from a variety of places. I kind of hinted to it a little bit early on. Might want to take a guess?
Is that like the biological, environmental, or the ones that you had showed on that first slide, maybe? I mean, they can come from all over the place, to be honest with you.
Yes.
That it sounds like.
So these are our contaminations actually happen. So animals we use for food, okay? How many of you are familiar with some of the foodborne illness outbreaks that have occurred in the last 20, 30 years? Anybody familiar with the restaurant Jack in the Box?
Yeah, I remember that. I was on the West Coast when that happened. I was living there.
So
The
Jack
E.
in the
coli outbreak.
Box.
Yeah.
Yes. So that Jack in the Box had a massive outbreak one time with their hamburgers, and really the outbreak really occurred at the farm, not necessarily at the establishment. Okay. So the animals we use for food is a big part of the reason why we have contaminations. And I'll advise you to actually take a look at a documentary called Food Inc. Food Inc. is a very, very eye-opening documentary. It's not meant to convince you to change your eating habits 100%, but more so have more of an awareness of where your food comes from and more of your purchasing habits. But Food Inc. is an excellent documentary, and there you will see and be exposed to how food has come from the animals and how it gets to us. So Food Inc., definitely check that one out. The air and contaminated water and dirt is another reason why contamination happens. It's just natural for that to happen because, there's particles and bacteria in the air that we live and breathe. So that same air is how animals live and breathe. And once that food is exposed to that, then that's how the contamination can actually happen. Okay. Also, people will accidentally and deliberately contaminate food. This happens quite a bit as well. There is another movie where there's a great example of deliberate contamination. It's a rated R movie. It's called Road Trip. It's a very, has a very, I would say, college lifestyle feeling of a movie party kind of, teenagers that are in college. There is a scene in there where there is a deliberate contamination of food. There's another movie called Good Burger from the 90s, which is, I think, a Nickelodeon-based film. There's deliberate contamination of food as well in that movie. So people will do this deliberately to contaminate your food. So, just be mindful of who is in your operation. And if you're at home, be mindful of who is touching the food and whatnot. Okay, so biological contaminations, these are the symptoms of that. So we have diarrhea, we have vomiting, fever, nausea, abdominal cramps, and jaundice. Is anybody familiar with jaundice or knows what it looks like?
I think people that might have problems with their liver, they might have that yellowish color, but I don't know if it's all related to that, or it could be.
Yes, that is correct. So jaundice is yellowing of the skin in the eyes. And usually if you see this in babies, it's not very common to see it in adults from a foodborne illness, but it is still possible. But it's yellowing of the skin in the eyes. These symptoms, all of these symptoms, and I'm sure all of us have experienced one or two of these at some point, but these symptoms can, occur within minutes, or it can take time to, develop. And the worst is that we don't want it to develop to a point where somebody's actually in the hospital fighting for their life. So these are definitely the main symptoms that you will see with the biological contamination. Okay, and here is a picture of jaundice. Actually, I forgot I had this in this slide, but you can see here the gentleman on the right he's at a normal complexion, and that is from what eating food or whatnot, and then you can see what he looks like if he had jaundice. So he definitely does not look well. So yellowing of the skin in the eyes is not a good look. And again, with some of these symptoms, particularly jaundice, you want to get approval if you've recovered from it to be around people and be around food from the doctor. And at this point, jaundice is also reported to the health authority. So you want to get approval to return to work or wherever it is that you need to attend to come back after contracting jaundice and recovering from the same time. Okay, so we mentioned, or Vivian had mentioned, salmonella earlier, and now we're going to talk about those different bacteria and pathogens. So these are considered to be the big six. So these are food handlers that are diagnosed with these illnesses from the big sick pathogens should not work around while they're sick. So in this case, we translate it to home. If you are sick with any of these, stay away from the kitchen and stay away from loved ones until you've fully recovered. So we also have Shigella, SPP, which is sourced from human feces and is linked to cold, ready-to-eat foods and salads. So for example, like how we eat, let's say a tuna fish sandwich, and we contract Shigella, that's a big problem. And Shigella is also linked sometimes to when you have flies in your home or in your operation, they land on the food, they can spread this particular pathogen. We also have two types of salmonella. We have Salmonella typhi, which is linked to ready-to-eat foods as well, also water, and this is sourced from humans. So if a human is diagnosed with this particular salmonella and it spreads, that particular one. The second salmonella, which you see is the third bullet point, is the non-typhoidal salmonella. It's called NTS salmonella. This one is sourced from farm animals, poultry. So if you eat contaminated eggs or contaminated chicken or even turkey, more than likely you will contract this kind of salmonella. Okay, our next bullet point is, I always struggle with saying this, so I'm not going to say it, but short name is E. coli. This is sourced from cattle, so ground beef, sometimes steaks and chops and whatnot, but all considered red meat. This is the one that is linked to, and as Patrick mentioned, he said he remembered the Jack in the Box story. This is more than likely what was contracted with those individuals that ate those particular burgers. So salmonella, E. coli is a massive pathogen. And then we have the other two, the last two, which is more linked to shellfish. We have hepatitis A and norovirus. Okay, we typically hear about these two pathogens, particularly what always seems to be coming from the cruise lines. People are contracting norovirus and hepatitis A, and it has to do with shellfish. So these are the big six that you have to look out for and be cognizant of. How many of you are familiar with a consumer advisory disclosure when you go to a restaurant? Anybody know what that is?
Usually like in the menus, for example, or I
Yes.
actually have even seen it in the door saying, for example, sushi, like this restaurant utilizes raw food, or the peanuts or things that can cause allergies. Is that what I think it could be?
Yep, that is exactly correct. So consumer advisory is on the bottom of restaurant menus advising the guests that consuming raw or undercooked food could result in a foodborne illness. That is typically the verbiage that they use. What I will say with that is they have that on there for liability purposes, but just be cognizant of the fact that just because, you know, like for example, I use beef as a great example. People like to order their steak to cook to a certain order, medium well done, and whatnot. Just be cautious when you're consuming these foods that are slightly undercooked. There always is a chance of a contamination of some sort that could lead to any of these pathogens. So just be very, very cautious of that. But we don't want anyone to get these. So at home, when you are practicing, you know, make sure you are practicing all of those habits we discussed, making sure food stays in the refrigerator, it's properly cooled, make sure we wash our hands, and we pay close attention to where we buy our food so that we can avoid any of these big six pathogens. Okay, so bacteria of all foods grows in what this condition is called. It's called fat tom. So bacteria needs growth. Bacteria grows in food. So food is requirement for that to actually happen. Bacteria grows in food that's slightly acidic, less acidic. So for example, it's very hard for bacteria to grow in limes and lemons because those are heavily acidic foods. So bacteria grows in that. Bacteria needs time to grow as well as temperature. There's conditions that make bacteria grow. And just so you guys know, the temperature danger zone is where bacteria grows the most. Is between 41 degrees and 135 degrees. So Fahrenheit. So between those two ranges right there, that's where bacteria will grow the most. Bacteria needs oxygen as well to grow, and as well as moisture. When there's moisture in the air or moisture in food, likely you will see the growth of bacteria. So as Patrick mentioned at the start of the class or earlier, that things where mold grows, those foods that where that mold growth contains all of these conditions for the bacteria to actually develop. Okay. So what can we do, actions that also contaminate food here. We have scratching of the scalp, running our fingers through our hair, wiping, touching our nose, touching a pimple or infected wound, spitting, coughing, sneezing. Having a foodborne illness or working with someone who is sick, if we touch anything that may contaminate our hands, if we don't wash it directly after. Also having these symptoms, as we discussed, diarrhea, vomiting, and jaundice, and wearing dirty clothes. These are all actions that contaminate our food. And it's very, very natural for us to, particularly when we're working at home and we're working with food, to do some of these actions and not pay close attention. And the main one I would say is when we touch our forearms, or, you know, we run our fingers through our hair and we don't really recognize it, or if we need to wipe our nose of some sort, we don't recognize it. So at home, be very cautious of that. Make sure we wash our hands. So when we prepare our food, the food is prepared safely. Okay, so here is the actual hand washing process. So if you've never seen this before, this is a step-by-step instruction on how you should wash your hands. Okay, so the first thing is we want to wet our hands and arms. We want to use running water as hot as we can comfortably stand it, and it should be at least 100 degrees Fahrenheit. That's going to kill off the bacteria off of our fingers and our hands. We apply soap, scrub our hands vigorously for 10 to 15 seconds. Make sure we get underneath the fingernails. I always say it's important to have fingernails short. If you cook a lot at home, get all that bacteria out and dirt. You can sing happy birthday twice, the full song, and that's plenty of time to make sure your hands and ensure that they're clean. We can rinse our hands and arms with warm water and then use a towel to dry our hands. When we dry our hands, make sure we turn off the faucet if it's not an automated one with the actual towel. Okay, so this whole process should take no more than 20 seconds. If you exceeded the 20 seconds, you're totally fine. If you utilize that 20 seconds, make sure you spend a little bit more time washing your hands, okay? I will say this because I get this question a lot about hand sanitizers. Hand sanitizers are not a replacement for hand washing, okay? It's only an enhancement to the hand washing process. So, and remember, hand sanitizers is a chemical contaminant as well when it comes in contact with food. So make sure your hands are completely dry after you've gone through the whole hand washing process. Any questions thus far? Okay. You guys picking up tips and things that you can work on when you get home?
Yes.
Yes, awesome. Okay, we won't have too much time left, so let's continue. So I'd mentioned that flow of food process earlier. So these are the 9 stages of the flow of food process. So we start with the purchasing stage. We have the receiving stage, the storing stage, preparation, cooking, holding, cooling, reheating, and serving. So this is how food comes through to our mouths. It goes through all of these steps, whether if it's a restaurant or if it's a grocery store at home. So we know that the food is coming from the farm, so we make that initial purchase. So in our case, since it's for home, we make that purchase at the grocery store. We take it home, when we drive it home, or if we're doing Uber Eats or, what's some of the other ones? DoorDash or Instacart. There it is, Instacart. That's part of the receiving stage. So we'll make sure when we buy our groceries, we go directly home or keep it in the cooler. We make sure we put the food away, and then we begin and we get into these other stages, okay? So to prevent the keep food safe through the flow of food, we have to try to minimize cross-contamination and prevent time and temperature abuse. So how many of you bag your own groceries at the grocery store, or you just rely on the cashier?
Both times. I do both, depending. Sometimes they quickly do it because I'm still unloading what I'm going to buy. So they usually do it, but I try to do my own because I like to bag things in a certain way.
Right.
Unless, of course, less people touching it.
Right.
Same thing. I do my own as well, but I tell them the whole time, oh, I used to work at a grocery store and do this, and my kids always get embarrassed. But
yeah. So I would say this: the next time you go grocery shopping, make sure when you are organizing your grocery cart, make sure that you keep things separate. So for example, like when I go grocery shopping, I always put if I'm buying red meat or seafood, I put them at the bottom of the cart, and then I work my way up to the front of the cart with the food. And then, because I don't want any chance of a contamination. I never know what's going to happen. So when I'm loading my food onto the conveyor belt at the cashier, I always put the meats on first and let them scan that, and then bag that first, and then everything else according separately. So that will help definitely minimize any chance of contamination is how you bag it. So that way, when you load up your car or your trunk with your groceries, you know in your back of your mind that, okay, I know the chicken is not in the same bag as the eggs, or I know the red meat is not in the same bag as the milk. So you want to make sure you strategically put it on the conveyor belt that way so that there's no chance of contamination. Okay. So preventing cross-contamination. So here we can use separate equipment. We use separate equipment for each type of food. And I put this picture here so you guys can see the different colored cutting boards. This is something you may want to make an investment in for your home. These cutting boards are very inexpensive. You can go to TJ Maxx or a Home Goods or a Bed Bath Beyond and get these different color cutting boards and use them specifically for these types of foods. So for example, raw poultry, fruits and vegetables, raw poultry, use a yellow cutting board. For fruits and vegetables, use a green one. For red meat, use a red one. For any cooked food, you can use a blue one. Any dairy products or even breads, you can use a white cutting board. And then for seafood, you can use a pink one, okay? Or a light pink or a light brown, you can use that, okay? So you see these two pictures here, you can use different coloring cutting boards for different types of foods. You can also clean it, make sure you clean and sanitize, which is a requirement that you should already do. Prepare food at different times. So for example, like if you are going to make a, let's say you're going to make a jambalaya, okay, and you're preparing, and I love jambalaya. Does anybody love jambalaya?
Yes.
So yes, jambalaya is delicious. So for example, jambalaya has multiple ingredients in it. You know, it has andouille sausage, it may have shrimp in it, it has chicken in it, and then rice. So if you're preparing all of those ingredients together, which one do you think you're going to start working with first?
Well, the meat, the raw, right? Because it takes longer for it to get cooked and everything. So the things like maybe the chicken, I think, is the longest one probably that needs to get that temperature. I think it's 165. I don't know if
Yes.
I got that correct.
Wow, Vivian, you're quite the you have a lot of knowledge of this already.
Oh.
So yes, so chicken actually is cooked to 165. Red meat is cooked to 155. Steaks and chops is cooked to 145, and seafood is generally cooked to 135. Any kind of mixed combined ingredient dish, such as paella, that would have to be cooked to 165. But yes, Vivian, you are right. We actually should prepare the raw food first. So in this case, if we're going to put sausage and shrimp and chicken in our jambalaya, we prepare that first to get that out of what's called, again, the temperature danger zone, and make sure it's cooked. So we don't want any chance of contamination. Then we can go on and prepare the rest of the stuff to get ready to make this wonderful jambalaya. We can cut up our vegetables, we can get our rice ready together and make sure everything is cooked together at the same time, but we want to make sure we prepare it. And when I mean prepare, if we have to do any cleaning, any marinating of those raw ingredients. So preparing food at different times will minimize the cross-contamination. Or we could simply just buy the food already prepared. Doesn't require much prepping or handling. So if you look here in the picture, you'll see the bag lettuce already sliced and diced for usage. Okay, what not to buy or accept. So this is very, very important. And definitely we want to reject any items or not purchase anything that's been recalled. Some grocery stores actually do a great job of letting their customers know when there's an item that has been recalled. And I know this firsthand because I shop at Trader Joe's, and Trader Joe's will put out a message in the store if there's been a contamination. And I remember specifically seeing something in the last year regarding avocados. So rejecting recalled items is a big thing. Some of these other things that you see in the picture, you can see, like, for example, this picture with the shrimp. It looked like it was thawed and refrozen again. So when you notice ice crystals or water stains on the containers, then there's been some kind of tampering with the actual food. If you look at this next picture, we have a bag of flour, but you can see there's a big water stain on there in a slight brownish color. There's been some kind of mishandling of the food, and we definitely don't want to purchase those things. When we see things in grocery stores, such as dented cans or anything that has kind of rust on it or expired, dates of food, any signs of pest damage, we want to reject that food as well. I know a lot of us already do this, but we look at the quality of the food that we purchase, particularly when it comes to raw food, such as red meat or poultry or seafood. If it smells funny, it looks sticky, it looks weird or whatnot, then we definitely reject that. So we definitely want to be on the lookout when we're purchasing these items, okay? I know what I typically do is, like, if I'm buying milk at the grocery store, I typically go to the back of the freezer and pull the milk from the back instead of right in the front from the from the door at the grocery store. So, but just be very, cautious when you are grocery shopping, and just have an eye out on the food that you're purchasing. Okay, storage order. This is important as well. A lot of people at home do not store their food properly in the refrigerator. There is a method called FIFO, which means first in and first out. They do this at the grocery store already, but at home, a lot of people do not store it in a way that they can, act out this particular mythology of FIFO, which means first in, first out. So always use the item that you purchased at the earlier date, and the one that you just recently purchased, use that last. So make sure we store it in your home. Make sure you store it in your refrigerator in that same way. So if you buy a gallon of milk on Tuesday, and then you buy a gallon of milk on Thursday, make sure that if you have kids, make sure they're drinking and using the milk that was purchased on Tuesday first, then instead on Thursday. Okay. And then the biggest thing is storage order is you should store your food in this way. Always put ready to eat foods at the top of your refrigerator. So that could be, lettuce, tomatoes, fruits, vegetables, or something that's already cooked. Okay. Seafood on the next shelf, ground beef and pork on the next one. The second to last shelf, if you have space, put the ground meat or ground fish, or the whole poultry last. The reason why you want to do it that way is because these foods tend to leak onto one another, and so it's just stored in a way because of the temperature that it needs to be cooked to. So I had mentioned earlier, chicken is cooked to 165. The next temperature is 155 for the ground meat and ground fish. The whole cuts is 145. The seafood is 145, and ready to eat food is 135. So this storage order is based on that minimal internal cooking temperature. Okay. Ways that you all can thaw foods is, and I'm running out of time, so I'm going to try to speed it up, is to make sure you thaw out food in the refrigerator. Do not leave it on the countertop overnight and let it thaw out. It's not a good idea because you have no temperature control. But if you're in a rush and you're trying to thaw out something, you can submerge it under running water for 70 degrees. The water has to be at 70 degrees or lower. Don't let it go longer than 4 hours. Sometimes you can use ice or salt, block salt, to try to help defrost it a little bit sooner. You can cook food in the microwave and thaw it out that way. Not my favorite thing to do. Or you can just go ahead and cook the food if it's already frozen, okay? Now, that's thawing food. To cool food, to do the reverse, so to speak, we can put things in what's called an ice water bath. So we can fill up our sink with ice water and then place whatever the food is, particularly if it's a sauce or soup, put it in an ice water bath. That will help it cool it down. Or we can purchase an ice paddle, which is like a frozen paddle that will exuberate cold air into whatever we're trying to chill. And that you can probably purchase on Amazon. Okay, so just a couple things to remember for you guys. Now that we've gotten to the end of our presentation, we have to be conscious of what we purchase and where we purchased our food from, because that will make a huge difference to preventing us from getting sick at home. Don't take for granted food safety. Just because it applies to a restaurant doesn't mean it can apply at home as well. So foodborne illnesses does not care whether you're in a restaurant or you're at a bar or you're eating from a food truck or you're just simply cooking at home. It will appear wherever there's any kind of, there's no good practice of food safety. Okay, bacteria is everywhere. Always remember that. Okay, enjoy the process of feeding your family safe food and keeping your home clean. This will always keep everyone safe, and people can enjoy, food that has been prepared safely and it's free from bacteria. Okay, and food is everything. I love food. I'm sure you guys do, and I'm such a foodie, so I'm always looking for the best food, not necessarily for always taste, but how it's prepared and where it's come from. So I just want to say thank you guys for attending. And if you have any further questions, you know how to contact me. You can contact Learning Resources, get a hold of me if you need to. And it was great to spend this hour with you talking about food safety. So thank you everyone for attending.